Mixed reviews for the Big 12. MarkRogersTV, the voice of college football, ranking the conferences. But before we rank them, we have to grind down the metrics. This is a closed experiment of how the Power 5 leagues competed against each other and the results on the field in 2018. So we are looking at the Big 12. We checked out the Pac-12. Please check out the video. And also the introductory video where we break down our formula. This is basically how it works. The three leagues in the ACC, the Big Ten, and the SEC have 14 teams. Therefore, we are adjusting all the seedings to 14-team leagues. So we have to adjust the Big 12 with 10 teams and the Pac-12 with 12 teams to a 14-seeded league to compare the seedings. And then we take all the results from 2018 between the Power 5 conferences, both in the regular season and in the postseason, and we put the results into context. So, for example, Oklahoma, we'll see this in just a second, beat UCLA. So that's 1-0 for the Big 12. That's 0-1 for the Pac-12. But should that Oklahoma win over UCLA count as much for the Big 10 or for the Big 12 against the Pac-12 as much as if Oklahoma would have beaten Washington? Well, of course not. UCLA went 3-9. They went 3-6 in the Pac-12, and Oklahoma was clearly the best team in the Big 12. They won the championship. All right, so Oklahoma being the 1 seed defeated UCLA, the 11 seed or 10 seed in the Pac-12. Therefore, we take the baseline of 14 points per game and we adjust it. Oklahoma should beat UCLA. The Big 12 should still be given credit for a win against the Pac-12, and the Pac-12 discredited for the loss. But we go with the seeding difference. The seeding difference would be Oklahoma at 1, UCLA at 10, so that's a 9-seed difference. Therefore, we take 9 away from 14, and the game's worth 5 points to the Big 12, and it's a -5 for the Pac-12. And because we adjusted the seeds, there are decimal points involved. Oklahoma was technically a 1.4 seed because we adjusted the Big 12 to a 14-team league, and also UCLA started out as a 10 seed in the Pac-12, but they became a 11.68 seed. You can follow the math. All right, let's look at it. For the Big 12 in 2018, 26-10 non-conference. That's in all games against Group of 5, Power 5 FCS. 26-10, much better than the Pac-12 from that standpoint. But against the Power 5, 9-9, that's pretty similar to the Pac-12's 9-10 performance. Group of 5 record, perfect, 10-0. Some of the better wins against the Group of 5 included these two gems. Texas Tech beat Houston. Good win for the Big 12, considering the Red Raiders did not make postseason play and they defeated a Houston team that finished with a 7-5 record. Oklahoma State beat Boise by 3 scores. Really good win for the Big 12 right there, considering Oklahoma State was only 3-6 in the Big 12, and Boise State was the top 25 team that won 10 games. Bad loss for the Big 12, not surprisingly, Kansas. That's the one FCS loss, losing to Nicholls State. All right, big wins for the Big 12. Of course, that gem in the Sugar Bowl, Texas over Georgia, huge win for the conference. Also, Oklahoma State defeating Missouri, a really good win for the Big 12, considering Oklahoma State was the 9 seed in the Big 12 and Mizzou the 8 seed out of 14 teams in the SEC. Therefore, the adjusted seeding, Oklahoma State at 12.6 defeated Mizzou, an 8 seed in the SEC. And of course, again, Texas over Georgia, both the 2 seeds in those respective conferences. Those were the best wins from a seeding standpoint. The rest of the wins for the Big 12 should have been wins because the wins were higher seeded teams beating lower seeded teams from the other 4 conferences. Here they are. Oklahoma, the 1 seed in the Big 12, defeated UCLA, the 10 seed out of the Pac-12. Oklahoma beat Army. We designated Army an independent. We included Army, BYU, and Notre Dame as Power 5 teams. So we designated Army because of their 10-2 finish, 11-2 finish, actually, with a bowl win over Houston, as a 5 seed. That made sense in comparing them against the other 5 seeds in America. Texas over Georgia, 2 seed over a 2 seed. Texas beat USC. Well, USC an 8 seed out of the Pac-12. West Virginia, 4 seed, defeated Tennessee, a 12 seed. So again, follow the logic here that every game starts out as a 14-point game. 14 points for the winner, negative 14 points for the loser. But in this case, West Virginia, 4 seed in the Big 12, defeated Tennessee, a 12 seed out of the SEC. So that's an 8 seed difference. So that makes that 14-point win for the Big 12 just a 6-point win for the Big 12. And again, the adjusted seed means it's a little bit different. And only a 6-point loss for the SEC. TCU, the 5 seed out of the Big 12, defeated Cal, the 7 seed in the Cheez-It Bowl. You've got Baylor over Vandy, 6 seed out of the Big 12, defeating the 11 seed out of the SEC. So again, it was a good win for the Big 12 with Baylor defeating Vandy in a really good bowl game. Exciting game, but consider the Bears were the 6th seed in the Big 12 and Vandy just the 11th seed out of the SEC. And again, Oklahoma State over Mizzou, a good win for the Big 12. Kansas over Rutgers, 2 14 seeds going at it. Kansas again a 10 seed, but adjusted 14 seed to a 14-team league. Kansas, the lowest seed in the Big 12, defeated Rutgers, the lowest seed in the Big 10. So that's a decent win for the Big 12. They got 14 whole points. All right, let's look at the losses. Alabama, Oklahoma, classic situation there where you had the best team in the SEC, the best team in the Big 12. That's a great measuring stick. Of course, Alabama won the game fairly easily by 2 scores, so that's a 14-point loss for the Big 12. Worst loss for the Big 12 by far. Maryland, the 11 seed out of the Big 10, defeated Texas, the 2 seed out of the Big 12. So that's not just a 14-point loss. Add the 9 seed difference, it's a 23-point loss for the Big 12. Damaging. Iowa over Iowa State doesn't sound like a big deal. Sounds like a pretty comparable game, but Iowa was just the 8th seed in the Big 10 at 5-4. And Iowa State at 6-3 was the 3 seed in the Big 12. Not a good loss there for the Big 12, losing to Iowa. Washington State over Iowa State in the Alamo Bowl. That's the 2 seed over the 3 seed. Syracuse with a win over West Virginia. So this really hurt the Big 12 as well. Will Grier out, 2 wide receivers out, left tackle out, and West Virginia loses to Syracuse. That's the 2 seed in the ACC, beating the 4 seed out of the Big 12. So that's a 12-point loss for the Big 12. But if they would have won that game, they would have picked up 12 points. Actually, they would have picked up the 2 seed difference. Added to the 14, they would have made up 16 points. They would have added 16 points for the win. So that was a 28-point swing. So when we get to the point in which we close this video out, close out the video series, we're going to let you know, even though the rankings are going to play out a certain way in terms of the metrics of the Power 5 games against each other, one game can completely tilt the rankings in terms of the metrics. That's why I'm going to bring context to it, then I'm going to rank them. All right, Ohio State over TCU, Big 10 number 1 seed, TCU the 7 seed out of the Big 12. Duke over Baylor, bad loss for the Big 12 as Duke, the 10 seed out of the ACC, defeats Baylor, the 6 seed or adjusted 8.4 seed out of the Big 12. Mississippi State over Kansas State, that's a 7 seed over Kansas State, which was the adjusted 9.8 seed, and then Ole Miss defeated Texas Tech, a couple low seeds out of the SEC in the Big 12, and Ole Miss won that game by 2 touchdowns on opening night. Were there bad losses? Well, there were big game losses. Obviously, Oklahoma losing to Alabama, that's everything. That's a playoff game. Not a bad loss, but a big game loss. Again, Iowa State, I consider those teams to be very comparable, but in terms of the seedings, it was a bad loss for the Big 12. Losing a 5 seed different game, Iowa State the 3, Iowa the 8, and losing that game, they lose about 17 points in that process. Syracuse over West Virginia, big game, big loss for the Big 12. And then the worst loss again, Maryland, the 11 seed out of the Big 10, defeats Texas, the 2 seed out of the Big 12. So this is how it all adds up. You take all the points for all the wins for the Big 12, you've got 99.6. If you take all the points against the Big 12, in the losses, that's negative 128.6. Negative 29 is the final for the Big 12, as they, again, went 9-9 in the Power 5. This only ranks and only measures the games against the other 4 leagues in the Power 5. This is interesting to me, always. So the numbers above the line are the wins. In the wins, those teams that won those 9 games against the other 4 conferences for the Big 12 won almost 74% of their games in the Big 12. So they were the best teams in the Big 12, and that makes sense that your better teams would win those games. Otherwise, they wouldn't be the better teams. Oklahoma with 2 of those wins. Texas with 2 of those wins. West Virginia, TCU, Baylor, Oklahoma State, and Kansas were the teams that won those games. Really, Kansas really weighted that down with 1-8, of course, weighing into that 74 winning percentage. This is where the Big 12 showed that their wins were weak and their losses were kind of bad, because in those 9 consecutive wins, the teams that they beat only won 39% of their games in conference. 39%. UCLA, Georgia, of course, lifted that up, but UCLA, USC, Tennessee, Cal, Vandy, Mizzou, and Rutgers. Most of those teams were bad teams in their leagues. Rutgers, awful. Even Vandy only went 3-5. Cal was 4-5. Tennessee was 2-6. Even USC only went 4-5 in the Pac-12, and of course UCLA was 3-6. So the Big 12 did not beat many good teams. They beat Georgia. They beat Missouri. Those are the only 2 good teams. Georgia was, of course, one of the best teams in the country. So that Texas win was huge. But other than that, Missouri, that would be the 2nd best win. Missouri or maybe Army would be the 2nd best win for the entire conference. Now the losses, this says a lot. The Big 12 lost 9 games in which their teams were almost as good as the teams that they lost to, and they lost all 9 games. Their teams, this is usually under 500, this record, because those are all losses. So these are usually your worst teams in the league, losing your games out of conference. But for the Big 12, the teams that lost those 9 games against the ACC, the Big 10, the Pac-12, and the SEC won 58% of their games in the Big 12. And the teams that they lost to were just a shade better at 60%, and they lost all 9 games. That's the seeding difference. It was basically the same. So the Big 12 is losing all 9 games to teams that have exactly the same seed, where here they're beating teams that have a seeding average of 3 spots lower. So this is what really plays into that negative 29 number. And again, Big 12 fans, we're going to put this into perspective in terms of playing well against a group of 5 at 10-0 and beating some good teams. But this is just against the Power 5, and those are the numbers for the Big 12. All right, we are rating and ranking the conferences here at Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. You can support the channel by not spending a dime, but going to one of the Amazon links in the description section under the video and grab that Amazon link, do your regular Amazon shopping just using one of those links, and you will support Mark Rogers TV, the voice of college football. All right, we love to get your take on our formula and on our rankings right here at Mark Rogers TV. We will see you next time.